I didn't set out to start a business. All I wanted was a stable career. But then I got sick of people who underestimated me. What if your content could work as hard as you do without you creating more? Welcome to Create Like a Human. I'm your host, Isabel Chen, content strategist and founder of Fairfox Digital. And this is the podcast for established, high-achieving founders who are ready for storytelling-centered marketing strategies that don't die within a week. Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Create Like a Human podcast. So I wanted to create this podcast because I know that there are so many personal stories out there of why people got into business or sort out different life experiences, move across countries, or make a big change in their lives. And so this podcast is designed to show the world why your story matters. And because this is the very first episode, I am going to tell you a little bit of my backstory of how I went from being a scientist to a social media marketer and now running my own business. So let's start with my story. My name is Isabel Chen and I was born in Singapore, but I grew up in Malaysia and then I moved back to Singapore when I was 9. And as with all children, my dream was to become a veterinarian because I really loved animals. And that stuck with me all the way throughout school. I studied to become a vet nurse with the intention to travel abroad to study veterinary medicine because it wasn't offered in universities in Singapore. And the funny thing was, in my first clinical placement of my vet nursing diploma, I actually found out that I was allergic to something in the clinic. My eyes were teary, nose was watering, couldn't work out what it was because I've always had pets growing up. I've had hamsters, fish, terrapins, dogs, you name it, I probably had it. So the dream to be a vet was put on hold. And it was that moment where I was wondering, if I can't be a vet, I've studied so hard for this all my life. What can I do instead with all the subjects I've studied? And so it was to broaden out into biotechnology. Using my diploma in vet nursing, I actually got into university in Australia to study biotechnology. There's a bit more that went on behind the scenes, but maybe I'll elaborate on it in a future episode, maybe not. Anyway, I eventually made it to Adelaide, Australia, which I picked because most Singaporeans and Malaysians tend to choose Perth in Western Australia as the place to study. But I didn't want to leave home behind and go to another place that was like just the same as Singapore. So Sydney and Melbourne were cities I definitely did not want to live in a crowded place. And then I looked at Adelaide. I looked at the climate in Adelaide, which had 4 seasons, and I said, Adelaide is the place I'm going to go, Adelaide in South Australia, because there's nobody and it has 4 seasons. And so off I went, knowing nobody in Australia, and I was like 23 at the time. I arrived here knowing nobody. But luckily, the university had this great orientation service for international students. I soon made a lot of friends there. 10 years later, we're actually still the best of friends. But anyway, that is how I became a scientist. So upon graduation, it was a really short time that I spent in uni because my diploma actually allowed me to skip first year. So I entered second year of uni and had some exemptions for the subjects I had taken previously as well. So I spent a lot of time at uni volunteering for the International Student Centre, where they used to run cultural nights. And I learned a lot about Australian culture through friends that I met through those events, as well as interacting with the staff at the uni. So how did I get into marketing? Well, when I graduated uni, I got a job in South Australia's fruit fly program. And if you don't know this, South Australia is one of the states which is actually fruit fly free, which means that there isn't any pests here that will destroy fruit crops within the state. And so at the South Australian borders, if anyone brings any fruit in, they are expected to dispose of it so that they don't bring any fruit fly into the state. So that was my job for about 4 years-ish. And it was very routine. It involved days where you would do the same thing over and over again. You do a lot of things like repetitive movements with your hands to put liquids into tubes and do a lot of like squatting to move cages of flies up and down. Really, it was actually almost like being a fruit fly farmer, which is what I used to call it, and what some of the interns from the School of Agriculture called it as well. So while it was interesting at first, it soon got really repetitive after about 4 years, and I thought there must be something else. There must be something bigger that I'm supposed to do with my life, right? And at the time, it was 2019. My dad was starting an e-commerce store. Shopify had just made its way through the world. People were setting up online stores to earn an extra income. And my dad said, hey, can you help me with marketing this business? Because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't understand the website and Facebook and all that. And you're my daughter and you have to help me for free. Which I'm sure if you are Asian and listening to this podcast, your heart relate. And so that's how I got involved in the marketing space. So I would work my regular lab technician job in the day, and then at night I would come home and my dad would give me things to update on the website, and I would just have to do it. No wasn't an answer then, because yeah, if you're Asian, if you know, you know. So I realized I actually enjoyed problem solving, and I thought there must be a demand for marketing out there since social media is still relatively new at this time. And I had a look at the local TAFE, which is like, if you are a Singapore listener or someone overseas listening to this, it's like a polytechnic. So you can go to it and you can graduate with certificates or diplomas. That's a qualification that's just below a bachelor's degree from a university. And when I looked at TAFE SA, they had this new diploma called the Diploma in Social Media Marketing. At the time, I was still feeling like I need an additional qualification because while I had a Bachelor of Science degree, I still felt like people wouldn't take me seriously if I didn't have a marketing qualification and at the very least a marketing diploma. So I enrolled in a program part-time and I did it while working my job at the lab part-time as well. It was a bit of a difficult juggle because I was going to my job in the lab and then I would be still working with my dad at night and then trying to finish assignments from TAFE. But eventually I made it through, graduated with the diploma in social media marketing. As soon as I got that diploma, I said to the lab, I know I'm going to leave science because the main reason why I wanted to get out of science didn't have that kind of job stability that I was looking for. So most of us were on contracts that were short term, say like 3 months. So every 3 months, you would then have to ask the lab manager, is my contract going to be renewed? And then they would come back to you and say, yes, we've got funding for this project, or no, we haven't got funding for this project. And so you'll be retrenched. So like, we're not going to go on with this project. And then you will have to find something else to work on. Sometimes if you were lucky, they could place you on a different project so you would keep your job. And because of that instability in my science career path, I decided to switch careers in my 30s to marketing, which was a real eye-opener. Most people working in science are actually, they've moved here from another country. So I was very used to working with people who, some of them, they might be Australians from regional areas or like from the country, and other people who came from countries such as Bangladesh, Turkey, everywhere around the world. So I was very used to working in that kind of global network where people came in with different accents, different points of view, different cultures, and they were very open-minded. But as soon as I started trying to look for a marketing job, that was when my mind was blown. So I would get interviews where it was all going well, and then they would ask me something like, how do you think you'll fit in with team? At this point, I had already been in Australia for nearly 12 years. I had graduated from a university where the whole degree was taught in English. And also, I had grown up in a former British colony. Singapore and Malaysia. Both countries are former British colonies, and people speak English as one of the many languages there. But still, I was seen as an outsider, and it didn't just happen with one interview. It happened with a number of interviews. I would hear, "We're not really sure if you'll fit in with the team." One even had the audacity to proclaim that I should speak a bit slower and use less hand movement because it was highly distracting. But luckily, there was one place that decided to give me a chance. And I soon found myself in my first marketing role in a disability nonprofit in 2020. We all know what happened that year. 2 days of starting my new job, we were told that we had to start working from home because of COVID restrictions. This was my very first marketing job, so I was quite new to the role. It was a new role that had been created by the company as well, so they hadn't really worked out like what they needed a social media person to do. And then we were all being sent to work from home, and it was all a new experience for everyone in the office. So I was soon thrown into the deep end, which at the time it was a bit scary, but now when I think back to it was a really good thing to have happened at the time because it meant that I had to pick up things quickly and be adaptable. So soon they realized they couldn't communicate with people in person, so they had to move everything online. So we were sending out emails. We were trying to figure out what we should do on social media, how to stay connected with people who support us, the community, people who are involved in our programs. And luckily, I had a very supportive manager as well, who was trying to help figuring things out along with me. The first 6 months were quite interesting. It was me getting used to my role, and a part of that role was really staying in touch with our community from the disability space and seeing how they were going during COVID. Because with a lot of people in the disability space, some of them might already be a bit isolated due to the nature of their disability. Like, for example, if they were blind, they couldn't drive a car. So they would be a bit limited as to certain places that they could go to. And with COVID restrictions in the mix, it meant that that was amplified further. So a big part of my role at the time, which I really enjoyed, was actually listening to these people's stories, asking them questions, sort of like in the style of Humans of New York, if you've ever heard of that project. Asking them how they were doing, how they were getting by during COVID, and how they were staying in touch with people and their local community. And we got a lot of interesting stories out of that. I met people who were in big careers in the past, and then they might have started losing their eyesight in old age, and so they couldn't keep working their jobs anymore, so then they had to adapt to that. And there were all these stories of resilience and people just thriving despite what life had thrown at them, which was quite interesting. And often, what I noticed was that these personal stories were the types of content that got the most traction, the most engagement. I didn't know it at the time, but it was because that people really like connecting with other people. And it's such an important concept to remember, especially right now where we have AI generated content so commonplace everywhere. AI can't replicate people's stories, and it isn't very good at writing emotionally charged words. That still comes from people themselves. That job was actually, when I started out, it was a dream role for me. But it soon became a bit hard. So as COVID restrictions started easing off in South Australia, I soon found myself getting a bit busier because I was finding my feet. I was getting used to doing what I was doing, and because of my science background, I knew how to interpret numbers, which the organization hadn't been able to figure out before. So with any kind of marketing presence, you usually have a sort of baseline result. And what I mean by that is that ideally, you'll be tracking numbers. So these numbers are usually related to your business goals. For example, if you have a business goal of getting more people on your email list, then you could track things like how many people are seeing your content when you're posting it, and how many of those people who have seen it are then going on to subscribe to your email list. So before they got me on board, they actually had all these numbers in their social media dashboard, and they didn't have any idea how to correlate these numbers with their business goals. So I was using my knowledge of interpreting results to help them figure out what all these numbers meant, and to make sure that there were some results that we were aiming for, which meant that we were doing our marketing strategically and not just for the sake of putting something out there. So because I was getting really comfortable in my role and also delivering results for the organization, I soon had colleagues refer people to me, whether unintentionally or intentionally. Thank you for that. But I soon got a number of freelance clients alongside my full-time marketing job, which meant that I had to drop down to part-time hours because I couldn't possibly juggle multiple clients and a full-time job at the same time. With these clients, what I would notice is that even though I was doing similar tasks for them, which was helping them create social media strategies and creating content for Facebook and Instagram, I enjoyed working with these clients far more than in my job, where I had to do the same task, but it was subject to approval, and sometimes there were delays in people getting necessary information to me. So I couldn't deliver on KPIs. I stayed in that job for 3 years. 3 years too long, to be honest. And it was at the point where 3 years in, I was managing social media for the organization. And it wasn't just one social media account, because within the organization, we had multiple projects that I was working on. So it was a couple, I think at least 5 social media accounts: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, now known as X. And I was also doing video production at the same time. As part of my role, my manager had asked me to enroll in a mobile video production course. This was when our office was still closed due to COVID restrictions. So it was teaching me how to create short videos using a mobile phone, which I was surprisingly naturally good at. So then my job then evolved to include video production as well. And if you are a creative person who has done multiple roles in your jobs before, say you're a graphic designer, you'll find that there tends to be a moment when there is scope creep, and that was what happened to me in this role. I was soon playing 3 roles at once. I was doing social media management, I was doing video production, and video production didn't mean just the filming. Because we were a really small team in this organization, so we would do everything from the start to the end, which meant planning out the shoot, scripting which questions to ask, doing the filming, and doing the editing, and then refining that for posting to social media. So that will all be done by one person. And I was also assisting with updates to the website as and when they came in. So at the end of 3 years, I always felt like I was coming into work and I was playing catch up. And I always felt behind, and like I wasn't actually hitting all my job targets anymore. So there were certain KPIs we had to meet each month. I wasn't hitting them for one department, but the irony was for another department, I was killing it. Because there were other departments that were a bit quicker in giving me what I needed to do my job well. And with those, I would be killing it. But in the other department, some people were slow to provide me with the information I needed to create content or to write out a web page, to write out a blog. So I can't just create something from nothing. And at that point, 3 years in, when I had already asked during every single meeting for them to put the budget towards hiring a second person to job share with me, but nothing had happened because they said they had to check their budget each time. I said to my manager, I said, I think it's time for me to leave this role because I feel like they'll only take me seriously if I quit. And so I handed in my notice. What happened was there was actually a new marketing manager that had just come on board around the time I handed in my notice. I was going on holiday then, so I told her a bit more about what I handle in my role, and then I passed on my tasks to her so that she could handle them while I was away on vacation. And when I came back, she told me, she said, Isabel, I understand why it always feels like you're behind, because when I was doing your roles in those 2 weeks, it is actually a full-time load, but now that you're doing part-time hours, that load has still stayed full-time, and that's why you always feel like you're behind, because there's no way you can do that in part-time hours. And that realization was the straw that broke the camel's back. So I said, well, that assures me that I made the right choice to quit then. And that was how I just leapt in to my business, which was a side hustle at the time that was juggling alongside my role. And this is now what I do full-time, helping established founders create strategic content that doesn't sound robotic. So now that you've heard my story, I want to share how you can create a strong foundation behind your brand. And I feel that this is quite important, not just for people who are starting out, but also for people who have been in business for a while, and maybe you started it out of necessity like me, where you had to leave a toxic job, or you actually had to earn some money for personal reasons or for family reasons. Business is always going to have ups and downs. And what is going to keep you going during those times when there's a dip is remembering why you started this thing in the first place. There is a simple way to do this. There's a website which I am going to drop in the show notes called 7 Levels Deep. And what it does is when you go onto it, it's going to ask you a question. It's going to ask you, why are you doing the thing that you do? So you type your answer back to it, and it'll keep asking you why until you arrive at something that is at the core of why you started doing this thing. So initially it asked me why I started my business, and I said, well, I wanted to earn some extra money alongside my full-time job. And then he'll ask me, why do you want to earn extra money? And I say, well, I want to earn extra money because I want to pay for dance classes and silks classes, because I feel like I need to do something outside of my job that is fun for me, rather than just working my whole life away. And they'll ask, why is that important to you? And they'll keep going and going and going until I hit on this thing where I realized why I wanted to earn more money in the first place. And it was really because when I moved over to Australia, and especially in my career change, I was way underestimated. I was being judged by people because of my accent. And I wanted to help people who were like me. They didn't necessarily have to be from a migrant background, but they would be the kind of driven, hardworking people who want to actually make an impact in this world, and they were being underestimated by others around them, just because of the way they speak, just because of where they're from, just because of maybe not being educated in the right way or like preferred way. I've got a story about that, but we won't go into that right now in this episode. And that was what was really driving me behind this whole business, Fairy Fox Digital. That was what was really driving me to keep doing what I do. Helping people who have been playing it small because the world has told them that they should play small. But they're so over it, and they know the impact their work makes. And they just need someone who can help them amplify that. That's really why I started my business. And so we've come up to the end of episode 1. I'm going to wrap it up here and finish off with me telling you to go and try and find your deeper why, use the website that I'm going to leave in the show notes, 7levelsdeep.com, and share your results with me. You can find me on Fairfox Digital, and I am on most platforms, mainly on Instagram or LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in to Create Like a Human. If this episode sparked new ideas, I'd love for you to hit follow and leave a quick review. It will only take 2 minutes and means more people like you can find the show. Until next time, keep creating like a human.